So the structure of a leaf we looked at a little bit last time with the tissues and organs, and just highlighting it again with a little more emphasis on function. So we saw the epidermis, upper epidermis, lower epidermis, and diagrammed for you the upper cells of the inside of the leaf. These are the ones that are more devoted to photosynthesis. They're tightly packed, they're denser with chloroplasts, and the top side of the leaf for many species is devoted to really capturing light. So that's a big part of the ingredients for photosynthesis, is to get the light. The other ingredients for photosynthesis, of course, we need water. So we have these vascular bundles that are delivering water in their xylem cells. And then the gas that's required for photosynthesis, the carbon dioxide in, the oxygen out, that's enabled through the stomata, which are often on more densely on the undersides of leaves. So this set of spongy cells, actually call them spongy tissue in some cases. There's actually airspace in there in the lower portion of the leaf that allows the air to get around. And then these cells that are doing photosynthesis, they're getting the sunlight from above, but then they have access to carbon dioxide from below. So nicely illustrating in just even a little snapshot of a leaf cross section, all the different kinds of cells and how they work together to get the ingredients necessary for photosynthesis. This one is from a pine, so a conifer, basically what we call a pine needle, is technically a leaf. So we often call them needles, but here we are, it's just a leaf. So we've got a vascular system here, xylem and phloem and vascular bundles. Stomata, a couple places where the epidermis is open to allow gas exchange, and then these white spaces here, these are actually called resin ducts. So pine trees, some conifers have rather sticky sap, and that's one of their defenses against herbivores, is to be able to transport that, or at least have it stocked in these resin canals. So if somebody chewed on your needle, you can get a mouthful of pine sap. So axillary buds, we talked about how these are kind of a recapitulation of the apical meristem. So the apex, that is more typically devoted to continuing growth. So new stem, new leaves being produced from the shoot apical meristem. These axillary buds are laid down. Sometimes they grow out just in a matter of course as the plant is developing. And sometimes, case a little more obviously in our woody species, these axillary buds are placed and left over the winter. So in this plant, if this is a deciduous plant, the green leaves will fall off in the winter, or as the winter approaches, and then these buds will be dormant and protected against the elements. They have thick kind of woody scales on here. And then that's the potential for new growth in the next year. So pretty common to find axillary buds in all kinds of plants, but a little more obvious function in the woody plants that have to grow back after losing leaves. So if those axillary buds do grow out, they can produce these lateral shoots. So in this mint plant over here, illustrating how down here would have been axillary buds, and this one is grown out nicely into a side shoot. And the side shoot looks really no different from the main shoot, the central shoot here, just a little bit later in development. Some other examples, this is a quinoa plant or lamb's quarters that has these side shoots that are where the flowers and fruits are being produced. So still located in the axil of this leaf and the axil of that leaf for some of these growths. So sometimes they're differentiated into being actually reproductive structures. And then just another one here, this is a woody plant growing out its axillary bud there. So the axillary buds, the ones that grow out during the, for a woody plant from the winter to the next spring, that's more of a seasonally determined process. In a lot of herbaceous plants, if they have axillary buds, those axillary buds might grow out in response to a couple of events. Number one would be if the apical bud grows some distance away from the axillary buds, then they sort of lose this signal and they grow out into side shoots. Another possibility is that the apex is cut from the plant. So it's not uncommon for a plant to get chewed on. Somebody comes and takes a bite. Maybe they chew off the apical meristem. If that was the plant's only way to grow, that whole plant would be ruined. There'd be no coming back from that. But plants are, they're not strangers to being chewed upon. So losing the tip here just means that they're going to kick in some growth from some of these side shoots. So the theme is the same, whether the plant is grown up and the apex is far away from these, or if it's been cut and the apex is no longer there. In both cases, the apical meristem is not giving a signal down to those axillary buds. And so that's kind of the theme, is that it's sort of a signal, or some of the new thinking, as we'll see, is that the sort of a resource availability situation. So if the apex is no longer drawing resources from the area where these axillary buds are located, then they grow out. So what's highlighting here, I'll keep circling down here, but it's actually up here, these locations of buds. If the apex is cut or grows away from those axillary or lateral buds, then they can develop out into side shoots of their own. This one from a few years back, I always thought that was a fun news story. So the cutting, this response, this is also basically what people do when they prune their shrubs. So if you prune a plant and you cut off its one tip where it's going to grow from, sometimes it fills in with more than one of these side shoots. So for pruning, if you want your shrub to look more lush, you take away the one growing tip and you get two. So it fills in, it looks more green, more leafy. You can kind of control the shape that way. And this headline here, this talks about a situation where a couple discovered a plant that they didn't know, and they took it upon themselves, thought it was a lovely plant and deserved to be there, and they pruned it and turned it into a lovely piece of shrubbery. And then it turned out later on, the police paid them a visit and told them that their shrub was in fact a cannabis plant. So who knows how it got there, but they took loving care of it, and I think they did not receive punitive charges about that one. So we'll talk, one of our later topics in the semester will be hormones, this sort of chemical signal from parts of the plant to other parts of the plant. One of the signals that keeps these side branches from growing out is thought to be this auxin hormone. So this is one of the big hormones controlling growth in plants. And it's been demonstrated that that is produced from the shoot tip, and it's sort of channeled down through the parts of the plant, moved in one direction away from the shoot tip. And the presence of that auxin prevents these side shoots from growing out. So if they're near the growing tip, they kind of get the instructions not to grow out. But this was kind of a big deal a few years back, that some evidence also to support the idea that it's not so much that the apical meristem is giving a signal that says don't grow. It's maybe just that the apical meristem is very demanding of resources, specifically sugars, the energy it needs to do new growth. And as long as the apical meristem is intact, it's drawing away a whole bunch of resources. So it's pulling in the resources for new growth, and that's preventing these axillary buds from having enough resources to do their own growing. But if you remove the tip, then you also remove the reason for those sugars to go up, and they now have a new place to go, which is off to the side here. So in this illustration, IAA is that auxin hormone we were just looking at in the previous slide. So it's also responsible, but sugar is also now kind of an independent and major reason for the side growth to happen or not happen. So all these decisions about where the leaves are made, when they're made, how far away from the apical meristem the side branching happens. All of this is kind of becomes a little more of a mathematical pursuit for some people, and you can take a computer approach to this and say, okay, how do I make a plant? If I was to boil this growing process down into a very small number of planned decisions, kind of an if-then, sort of a mathematical modeling kind of situation, you can model the growth of a plant and change some of these parameters, the length of time from one branching to another, number of branchings that happen at the same time, things like that. So obviously you don't need to know any of the fine details of this, but basically you can hit this into a computer program and you get this or that or that. And some of these begin to look a whole lot like what we have as natural plants. And so you can kind of recreate the plants as they exist in nature. And this is a good kind of demonstration that you understand how they grow. So lots of programming, lots of different parameters to think about. What's the point? Well, if you understand it this way, then you can use this to kind of get in and try to look for or understand what the molecules are, like a molecular signal that maybe aligns with what you used in your computer program. So some of the little more extravagant versions of this document here, this is one of the researchers that's kind of leading the charge in computerizing how we understand plant growth. So these are some images that show computer modeled versions of plants that people know. So you might look at this and go, oh, I know that plant. So just basically a series of small decisions, a relatively small so-called programming for this, and then you get your result. And so I think if you're able to computerize your plant, you can say you basically understand how the cell divisions give you that overall plant form. So it has this application in just kind of understanding how plants grow. Also has application for maybe something a little more lucrative. So when people are developing computer graphics and they want to recreate natural looking plants, it's important to know how plants grow. And so in a situation like this, from a cinematic movie, you can grow your plants, and each plant is its own thing, but it behaves according to a set of rules. So if you've got variation, a little bit of variation in how these grass plants are put together, or the trees in the background, they might all kind of look like a species of tree that you're familiar with, but they're not strictly identical to each other, which is very important for giving a more natural feel. So if you love plants and you also love computer modeling and you want to get a job in computer animation, maybe this is the angle for you. So just another couple of examples from Pixar, one of the bigger media sources for artificial plants. Maybe you don't look at the plants in the background of your Pixar videos. Now you do. So another thing is you could take this understanding of plant form and also look at it through time, through evolution, through domestication. One of our later topics in the semester will be the changes that have happened in plants as they went from wild forms to domesticated forms. And so the origin of what we have today is maize or corn, very common plant around here, but it has a wild ancestor that looks more like this plant. So a very bushy, branched, multiply branched plant with small fruits became more centralized into one main axis, larger fruits. And all of those changes, they're genetic, so that we can plant the same kind of plants over and over again. And they'd be relatively few actual genetic changes. So a few genes acted upon that are the kind of the decision-making genes for when to branch, which direction to grow, and so on. So kind of all comes back together if you understand the whole picture. All right, so that's the topic of vegetative shoot growth. Next up would be vegetative root growth.